So kind of want to make sure we have as much time as possible to kind of review here today. But there's a few things I want to go through before we kind of jump into things. So the first is, if you're sending me emails, one thing that'll get you a quicker response and also make my life easier, if you don't email me through Canvas, please include the section number that you're in. That way I know if you have a question where I have to hunt around for something on Canvas, I'm not trying to find your name in the wrong section. So if you can do that moving forward, that would be helpful. Also, if we probably won't have as much time really to talk about anything other than the instructions for the exam on Thursday, because I want to give you as much time as possible. Also, I kind of already led with the spoiler, but what is Thursday? Our first in-class exam. So it'll be in class during the typical class time, right? So 11:10 to what, 12:25, right? So the whole hour and 15 minutes will be for the exam. If you're studying for it, any last minute questions, I have office hours again tomorrow from 10 to 1. I'll be over in my office in Wiley on the 3rd floor. Quite a few people stop by Monday. I'm guessing it'll be somewhat busy tomorrow as well, but it's a good time to kind of get some last minute questions answered. Also, I put up an announcement and mentioned these in class, but I said there's these extra economic tutoring sessions. So this week, do you remember what days they are usually available? Wednesday was the one I probably said is the most, I would recommend the most, because one of my CL leaders always works that Wednesday, and she's very good, Lily. So if you want to go ask questions, she'll be there from 7 to 9 on Wednesday. Tuesdays, they're available from 6 to 9. Thursdays are available from 6 to 8. That doesn't really help us, right? Because our exam is earlier in the day, Thursday. But if you want to ask additional questions, either tonight from 6 to 9 in the 3rd hall of Wiley, room 329 is where they will be. And then also Wednesday from 7 to 9 p.m., they'll be there as well, okay? Excuse me. Also, something I probably won't mention on the exam or waste time with, but after the exam Thursday, you will see the next kind of modules, materials start to pop up on Canvas. So the slides, I combine modules 5 and 6. So the reading you will be responsible for is module 6 reading. The module 5 reading might show up on Top Hat so that you can look through it, but the only reading assigned for points and that you need to do by the end of the day, Monday, that's when module readings are due, next Monday, will be that module 6 reading, okay? Other than that, I don't have anything else I wanted to say there. So the Canvas discussion, usually I said this when I first posted the assignment, and also week 1 we talked about them. You need to do what? Have an initial post and then do 2 replies to other. So most of you got that. I'm guessing it was maybe attendance related, but some of you missed it, right? And it wasn't explicitly stated in the actual assignment. Once again, I said it in class. I said it. It's in the slides from week 1. To be fair, because usually if we would have had class, I would have mentioned it along the way, and that was the week I wasn't here. If you posted an initial response prior to the due date, I'll end up giving everyone full kind of credit for that initial response and mentioning that OECD data. So if you forgot to do those 2 replies, it's not going to kind of count against you. Excuse me, for this first assignment. Those changes likely won't get made. I'm going to try to get them done by the end of the day tomorrow. You know, with a lot of people stopping by, emails, asking questions for this exam, I'll get to it as soon as I possibly can. So kind of refrain from emailing me about that. I should have those all updated hopefully by the end of the day tomorrow at the very latest. Okay. Moving forward, and I will be in class so I can mention it several times this next time, but you need to have your initial post. There's likely then going to be a data component and then 2 replies to other students. That's always what these Canvas discussions will look like. Okay. So this is where paying attention carefully when I'm describing things in class. In the future, I guess I'll explicitly throw in a line at the bottom that reminds you of this. So hopefully it won't be an issue moving forward. Okay. And we'll have that next Canvas discussion kind of posted pretty quickly after that exam. So that next week of material. Okay. Other than that, any questions for me before I talk a little bit about the exam and then we dive into some actual kind of review? Yep. I can't hear you. Oh, so anything other than questions about the exam? Okay. One other thing I'll mention, just so I don't have people showing up, those CL sessions, they only occur when we have new material. Do we have any new material this week? No. So this Thursday and Monday CL sessions, they don't have any problems to work through. There's no review, there's no practice problems because there is no quiz this week. We didn't have new material, so there won't be any CL sessions this week. I'll also work on getting updated by the end of the week, uploaded to Canvas, kind of the current attendance I have recorded from my CL leaders for the CL sessions. So you'll see a new category. It looks like a new grade category. It's just that I can kind of show you how many CL points that you've earned kind of this far. And I'll kind of update that every kind of exam and then prior to the final, okay? Or every so often. So the exam, kind of logistics I want to work through before we jump into actual review. You will hopefully be here early. There is a section before you that's taking the exam as well. So I will try to get them out of here. I have all of them. Will end at 10:50. It may take a little bit of time to get everybody then who is remaining kind of shuffled out, but try to get here 10 minutes early. I would expect I can get everybody out within 10 minutes and then kind of get ready, kind of be prepared so we can start the exam right when class starts at 11:10, okay? You will need something to write with, right? So the exam will be 25 multiple choice questions, right? Which is why the practice exams are all multiple choice. That's what the exam is going to look like. You'll have the full hour and 15 minutes to take it. I'll go over this the day of as well, but like your username that you'll enter putting into this little bubble sheet will just be that first part of your IU email. So you don't need like your ID number. It's just that first part of your IU email address you'll use as your ID. Obviously, you'll give me your name, date, things like that. You also will need a calculator. What type of calculator should you have for the exam? Ideally, a 4-function calculator. I can guarantee you I'm not going to have an issue with it if I'm walking around and I see you use it. There's a little bit of a wiggle room. Anything that's not a graphing calculator, right, you can use. So if some people have emailed me, oh, I've got a TI-30, can I use that? Scientific calculators where you can't store anything in, but have a few more functions like, square root, raise things to powers, that's okay. But try to get as rudimentary of a calculator. You don't need to do anything on this exam other than add, subtract, multiply, and divide. That's all you should need to do, right? So someone asked me, I don't have one of those. All I have is a TI-84 graphing calculator. What can I do? Go to the dollar store. They've got 4-function calculators for less than $5. I don't know the exact price, but they're cheap. You probably go to any bookstore, any of these, they'll have a really cheap, most rudimentary calculator that's all you should need. The rest of the semester, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, okay? So if I see you with a graphing calculator, I'm not dumb. What can you do with a graphing calculator? Store information, notes. So if I see you with a graphing calculator, what do you think I think you're doing? Cheating, right? I'm not going to like that, right? That's not going to be a good thing for you. You won't like the outcome, okay? So no graphing calculators, right? This needs to be something, like I said, a scientific calculator is okay if it's relatively rudimentary, doesn't have any storing capabilities, but safe bet, just a 4-function calculator is all you should need for this exam, okay? If you want something to write or extra paper to write with, you can write on the exam. So at the end of the exam, you'll turn in the exam and the Scantron. You can write on the exam. I don't care. In the margins, there'll be like a back sheet you can use. If you end up wanting more space and you want some blank paper, I'll have blank paper with me. If I see you have any paper out at any point during the exam, what do you think I think you're going to be doing? What do you think is going to be the outcome of that? Not good for you, right? If I think you're cheating, you got to take your exam and you get a 0, right? So if you want extra paper, I will have plenty of blank white sheets of paper that once the exam is handed out, I'll ask people, to raise their hand once the exam's off. If you want extra paper at any point, me or one of the proctors will kind of get you some, okay? I think that should be everything in terms of the logistics for the exam. Any questions for me? Not review problems yet, but related to the logistics of the exam. So it's going to be on paper. There will be a bubble sheet that you fill out. You shouldn't have anything open. No computers, no phones. If I see a computer or phone, what do you think you're doing? All right, this is an in-person exam, right? That's why we're having it in class during the usual class period, okay? Pretty quick. I won't promise by the end of the day, Friday, because I've got some other things I've got to do. But I would think by the time we meet next Tuesday, they should be hopefully posted. Yep. Should be able to use anything. Yep, pen, pencil, doesn't matter. Thank you for asking. So when you turn it in, what you will need, I know that all of your IDs, if you're freshmen, are now like not physical, they're on your phone. So you will need to kind of show me your ID. That means you will need a phone. That means don't have your phone out during the exam. When you turn in your exam, you can then get your phone out, kind of show me or the proctors who are up here, kind of your ID, so I can match. I know that people aren't taking exams for other people, right? So you will need to be able to access your IUID, so not a driver's license, right? You know, ultimately, if we have Wi-Fi issues, if you had a driver's license, it would be okay. But not everybody has one. I know everyone has an IUID, right? So you will need your ID when you turn the exam in as well. Yes. Any other questions about the logistics of the exam here? Yep. Nope. As soon as you're done, you can leave. As soon as you've handed your exam in, you're free to go. Which, just to give some advice, if you think you're going to be here for a good majority of, or you want to use most of the time, where should you probably choose to sit if you don't want to get disrupted? In the front, or if you don't get here early, in the middle, right? People, or if you're on the ends, you know, that's not going to be probably the most desired seating if you think you're going to be here the whole time. Okay. I don't, you know, I can't change the physical kind of attributes of this classroom. So kind of be honest with yourself. You know, probably the easiest things, fill in towards the kind of walls in the middle. That way, you know, we're not getting as many people as disrupted. Okay. Any other questions logistically about the exam before we keep moving here? Okay. If you have accommodations, you should have received an email from me yesterday. If you haven't, talk to me after class. But if you know, you should have received that email yesterday. If you haven't, you're here, talk to me after class. The other thing that I want to do, I'm going to edit this real quick and then I'll pull the screen up. So I'm just a little bit curious, but also I use this data to kind of show you after the exam, and I use it not with your names attached. Don't worry, I follow the ethics to show correlations, causation. So if you're here today on the main homepage, there's this midterm exam number 1 attendance. It's not for any points. I'm just wanting to record who is here today. So if we're looking at this, are you at the midterm number 1 review session right now? Yes, or why the hell would you put no? So yes, right? Record this so I know that you're here. I've got it open for like the next 5 minutes. I'm just interested if you're here for the review session, so give you time to get it kind of pulled up, respond to that. I look at this every semester. Like I said, I generally will pull it up after the exam to show you the correlation. What do you think is probably true about the correlation between attendance today and the exam? It's positive. It's pretty strong positive correlation, right? So don't be the one section that kind of lets me down so I can't say that anymore, right? So today is going to be hopefully very helpful. I'll work through as many questions as you guys have. I'll field questions from you. My last section, I didn't even have to start picking and choosing. I just generally was able to fill the whole time with questions from you guys. So there's no other questions about logistics for the exam or anything with the class. We can start working through some problems here. Anything's fair game. I'd probably suggest practice exam problems. So another thing I posted an announcement about, I posted a second practice exam on Friday. So it's another set of, I think, just over 20 questions. That might have been things I used on previous exams. I think when I initially posted Friday, trying to get out quickly, when I bolded the answer key, I switched 9 and 10. So the answer key was wrong. I updated that yesterday. So if you're using a version that you downloaded from prior to yesterday, it probably doesn't have the right answers for 9 and 10 on the answer key. I've updated that. So if you're using it from Canvas, you should see the correct answers now. And Any problems people want to see worked through though, either practice exam, old quiz questions, anything is fair game. We're all going to ace the midterm? Yeah. Yep. So let's think about, we have, and I'll kind of do a complete example. In fact, just so we can get through a lot of concepts at once, I think it's question, oh, now why is this not loading for me? Well, I've crashed Word possibly. I think this is, come on. Sorry, I'm getting the spinning wheel of death here. I might have to pull this up separately. Okay, well, so if we look at the second set of problems, and we go all the way down to question 22, okay? So I'm looking at practice exam 2, question 22, okay? And I will get to you, I'm not ignoring your question. We'll end with it, right? So it gives me this information that the unit elastic portion of my demand curve, well, that's why I don't play for the basketball team. So if I've got a demand curve and I know where the unit elastic portion is, generally that unit elastic portion is going to be kind of where on my demand curve? In the middle, right? So if I'm looking at the prices, I was told between $24 and $25, that's my unit elastic portion of the demand curve. I know the elasticity of demand there is equal to what value? 1. The percent change in price is the exact same thing as the percent change in quantity. So remember, when we're talking about the elasticity of demand, in fact, this is going to be true, and we might touch on this on other problems. Any elasticity we're looking at in this class, I don't know if I explicitly said this, but what do you notice is always in the numerator? The percentage change in quantity. Doesn't matter if we're looking at cross price, income elasticities, every elasticity, we have the quantity percentage change in our numerator. Now the price elasticity of demand, it's responding to a percentage change in the price of that good, okay? So if I'm talking about a price of 40 up here, so the problem says if the current price is 40. Well, how do I figure out, and this is where you don't have to memorize everything, or you can come up with tricks to memorizing it. So if I'm getting lower down in the demand curve, if I'm going down, what value am I getting closer to? 0. What does an elasticity of demand of 0 mean? It would be perfectly inelastic, right? Lower values are more and more inelastic. So when I'm looking at lower portions of the demand curve, I'm getting closer to elasticities of 0. I'm going to be on my inelastic portion of the demand curve. That's one way to remember it. Lower down the demand curve, my elasticity of demand is lower, I'm on the inelastic portion. Which means if I go up the demand curve, my elasticity of demand is getting higher. It's now greater than 1. This portion of the demand curve would be elastic, okay? So if I'm on the elastic portion of the demand, I know that if I'm at a price of 40, I'm above the unit elastic point. I must be on the elastic portion, okay? So we said this relationship that we have, between elasticities and total revenue is going to be at that unit elastic point. What did we say is true about total revenue? It's maximized or at its highest point. As I move away from that point, what is happening to my total revenues in either direction? They're going down, okay? So if I'm on the elastic portion of my demand curve, my current total revenue would be right here. The problem then says, okay, you know you're on the elastic portion because you're at a price that's above the unit elastic portion of the demand curve, right? You're in this higher part. If you decrease the price, right, from 40, what's going to be true? So if I lower the price from 40, what's happening to my quantity? It's going up, right? So if I lower from this price of 40, I'm moving to a higher quantity, and my total revenues are doing what? Going up, right? As I move towards that unit elastic point, my total revenues must be getting closer to that maximum value, which means they have to be going up, okay? Now, if I'm on, so I could actually do a summary of this, right? I think some people told me like some of the CL leaders did this. I don't know. I could see how it's helpful to some people. I think being able to draw out the graphs allow you to kind of look at multiple or more concepts. But if you want to think about, if this helps you kind of memorize it, you can memorize anything. I think it's better to understand like how things are working and like the logistics. But if you just want to memorize it, when I'm on the elastic portion, if I lower the price, what was happening to my total revenues? Total revenues were going, if I decreased the price, or sorry, if I increase the price, decreasing the quantity, what's happening to my total revenues? Well, if I move further away from that unit elastic point, my total revenues are going down, right? And then if I'm on the inelastic portion, if I increase the price, what's happening to my total revenues? They're going up. I'm moving towards the unit elastic point, so it must be going, my total revenues are getting closer to that maximum point. If I decrease the price and I'm on the inelastic portion, what's happening to my total revenues? They're going down. So price changes have the exact opposite effects depending on the elastic or inelastic portion. I don't know. To me, this is like a lot to remember and memorize, but if I have the graph, anytime I'm moving towards the middle part of the demand curve, anytime I'm moving towards that unit elastic point, my total revenues are going up. Anytime I move further from that point, my total revenues are going down. That's all this is summarizing. Okay? Any questions on this? Yep. So that was his original question. So now that we have this, we can show that the same principles apply whether or not it's elastic or perfectly elastic. So let's think about if I had perfectly elastic demand, right? So what is total revenue? So first of all, if it's perfectly elastic, which category would it fall in here? Elastic or inelastic? It's not a trick question. Elastic. So if I lower the price, what should happen to total revenues? They should go up. So let's think about why. Total revenue is price times quantity. Okay? If I have perfectly elastic demand, technically that would be an infinite value. It's hard to think about infinity, so let's just think about a really large value, right? So here, if I've got my percent change in the quantity demanded over my percentage change in price, how would I get an infinite value? It would have to be like the percent change in price was like 0.0001. And the response to that, people were perfectly, really, really elastic. Maybe I saw like 1,000,000% increase. Now that's not technically, but that's getting at the idea, right? A really, really, really large value, okay? So if I were to lower the price and demand was perfectly elastic, what's going to happen if I lower the price here? It's going to be a really, really small percentage change. I could like barely decrease the price. If people are perfectly elastic, what do? I lower the price a little and they buy all I've got, right? So in theory, can we ever truly see perfectly elastic? No, because nobody's making an infinite amount of product. But I can buy all of their product or a huge percent increase in the quantity demanded. So what's going to happen if I lower the price and demand is perfectly elastic? Total revenues are going to go up, which is, if we've got elastic demand, lowering the price, total revenue should go up. Or if I'm on the most elastic portion possible, small decrease in price is going to increase my total revenue. It's just here the visual doesn't quite work because it's not just a small change in total revenues. With perfectly elastic demand, it's like huge, like the slope of this total revenue curve just gets to be like completely vertical, which I didn't draw because it gets confusing. It's kind of weird. So if it helps, when you're talking about perfectly elastic and perfectly inelastic demand, I'm just talking about directional changes. Whether or not it's elastic or perfectly elastic, the directional changes will be the same. If I increase the price, in fact, so here I did a decrease in price. If I'm perfectly elastic, so we'll do a second scenario. If I increase the price by just a little bit, gets to be kind of, what does quantity go to if it's perfectly elastic? Small increase in price, all of a sudden people buy 0, or we would have a huge decrease in quantity. Quantity would be equal to 0. What's my new total revenue? 0 times anything is. So I would have this huge reduction, right? If I see a price increase and I'm on the elastic portion, total revenues go down. If it's perfectly elastic, they go all the way down to 0. Okay. So does that answer both of your questions? Yes? Okay. Did that get your question? Yep. Any questions on this one before we keep moving? So I just said the questions that you would like see. So this is where people are asking me like, what's on the exam? I give you the questions in the practice exams, quizzes, and practice problems because those are the types of questions I'm going to ask you, right? So if you look across those, do I ever ask you what the value of total revenue goes to? I only ask you about directional changes. So that's where I just said it doesn't matter if it's elastic or perfectly elastic. When I'm just asking you about the directional change of total revenue from a change in price, they would work the same way. So all you need to know is kind of that directional change in total revenue. Is that what you're getting at? Yeah. Okay. Any other problems people wanted to see? Go here and then come down here. You. 3? Okay. So this is a good one to work through. We'll kind of hit quite a few different concepts. So I believe on question 3, this is a PPC. Well, this is still froze. That's really annoying. All right. Well, as I talk, we'll have to kind of keep going back and forth, I guess. For some reason, Word is not cooperating. So I've got 2 individuals, and I was told how much they can produce of 2 different goods using all their resources, right? Question 3 is talking about our production possibilities curve. So these types of questions showed up on the practice problems for Module 2, the quiz, practice exam 1, and practice exam 2. Do you think you're going to see questions like this on the midterm? I would guess yes, right? I wrote it, so it's probably a pretty good guess, okay? So look at the patterns of these questions. When you're seeing the same types of questions pop up, I'd really make sure I know how to solve those, okay? So here we're given this information, and even if I don't want to solve the first 2, I'm just thinking about question 3, I would still set it up this way. The nice thing is if I set it up this way, I can not only answer question 3 really well, but I'll get the types of questions that like come before it as well. So I have 2 people here, and I want to think about, I eventually want to get to the economy-wide production possibilities curve, right? So I eventually want this economy-wide production possibilities curve. But to do that, let me think about each individual's production possibilities curve. So this is where I'll give you a little bit of a hint, and you can work through it either way. It doesn't matter. We're only going to do it one way for the sake of time. But if you see the good that has the larger values, it's probably easier mathematically to put that one on your y-axis, okay? So I think here the values that were larger were for t-shirts, so I'm going to put that on my y-axis. The lower quantities, I'm going to put that good on my x-axis. So I had 2 individuals here, Frank and Dennis. If Frank was only producing t-shirts, he could produce, was it 160? No, 140. Only producing green eggs, 70, right? Here's his production possibilities curve. Dennis, using all his resources, 120 t-shirts or 40 green eggs. Here's his production possibilities curve, okay? So in building my entire economy-wide production possibilities curve, if I'm thinking about these 2 goods, if I'm only producing t-shirts in this economy with these 2 people, how many total would I have? 140 plus 120, gives me 260. So I know that's going to be 1 point on my curve. Okay? What if they're only producing green eggs? 70 plus 40, which would give me 110. So I can find these two extreme points for my entire economy by just if both people were only producing that good. Okay. Now from here, who am I going to want to rely on to first start producing the x-axis good? Whoever can produce it at a lower cost. How do I find costs using individual production possibilities curves? What tells me the cost of my x-axis good? Slope. So how would I find the slope here? This is going to be what? Change in y over the change in x. So 140 over 70. Technically, it's downward sloping, so I have a slope of -2. Over here, 120 over 40. Technically, it's downward sloping, so I've got what? -3, right? So if I think about this, the cost of one more green egg, or the x-axis good, for Frank, it's going to be 2 t-shirts. For Dennis, it's going to be 3 t-shirts. Right? Now, if I had asked you instead, let's say I set this all up, or maybe I asked you for both. If I know the cost to my x-axis good, how can I find the cost to my y-axis good pretty quickly? It's just 1 over my slope, or 1 over the cost of that x-axis good, right? Or the reciprocal. So here, the cost to one more of the y-axis good for Frank would be 1 over 2. Dennis, it would be 1 over 3. So 0.5 and 0.33 repeated. So if I was asked a question about absolute and comparative advantage, who has a comparative advantage here in green egg production? Whoever can produce it at a lower cost. Who has the lower cost? Frank. Who has a comparative advantage in the other good? Well, automatically, I can only have a comparative advantage in one good because I'm calculating costs using this reciprocal. So I would automatically know, even if I didn't calculate these costs, Dennis should have a lower cost in the y-axis good or a comparative advantage in t-shirt production. So you can only have a comparative advantage in one of these goods. Now, if I was looking at absolute advantage, who has an absolute advantage in green eggs? What about t-shirts? So Frank can produce more of both goods if that's all he's using his resources towards, right? So you can have an absolute advantage in both products, one product, or no products. Comparative advantage, you will have a comparative advantage in only one of those products. Okay, so I'm hitting more questions here. I think we could answer 1 and 2 at this point, right? So for 3, though, I've now got all the work. It should make it a little bit easier. So I'm going to first rely on who can produce that x-axis good at a lower cost, which we said was Frank. So initially, my slope is going to be -2. So I start relying on Frank to produce these green eggs. He's now using all of his resources. How many green eggs would I have? 70. I haven't had to rely on Dennis yet at all, so how many t-shirts would I have? He's only producing t-shirts, so 120. So this point in the middle of our production possibilities curve will reflect where both individuals are only producing what they have a comparative advantage in. So these are kind of my 3 points I should always be able to find fairly easily for my production possibilities curve. If I want to go past 70, I'm going to then have to start relying on Dennis to produce that x-axis good. So now my slope would be -3. Okay? So we're looking in this problem for points that are not on my production possibility curve. So we'll start working through these. So I'll kind of choose some maybe that are the easiest. So maybe I look at some of these. I don't know if they're not one of these 3 points. If I don't see these values, maybe I hold off on them. So the first one, like 70, 120. Oh, well, 70 green eggs, 120 t-shirts. That was this middle point. All right. So that one's on the curve. What about 80, 90? That one's a little bit trickier. What about 0 to 60? Oh, well, that was one of my points on the curve. Okay, so I can rule those A and C out. 41, 40. Okay, that one's going to be a little trickier too. Those are somewhere here. I have to figure out, are those on my curve, above, below? So let's think about this first one. So if I want to 80 green eggs. How many t-shirts is that going to cost me? Well, I'm now on the portion where I'm relying on dentists, so I've got what? 10 more green eggs. Each one is going to cost me 3 t-shirts, so it's going to be a total of 30. So I'm going to lose 30 t-shirts. The point that I would be at on the curve if I produced 80 green eggs would be what? 120 minus 30 or 90. So that point's on my curve. So hopefully when I check the last point, it's not on the curve, right? It's the only one I haven't checked, right? So if I wanted 40 green eggs, that was the kind of fourth point, where would I be at on my production possibilities curve? Well, for those first 40, who am I relying on to produce those? Frank, whose cost is 2, right? So my total cost would be what? 40 times 2, or I'd have to give up 80 t-shirts. So 260 minus 80, I'd be where? At 180. So the point I was given in the problem was actually 40, 140, which would actually be a point that is below my curve. So that's the only point that's not on my production possibilities curve, was that 40, 140. Okay? So this is kind of how you would check those kind of intermediate points to see, you check to see what point would be on the curve at that X value. And then was the point I given, was that the actual Y value or was it not? Right? This point I would say is actually what? Production inefficient, it's below my curve. Any point above that would be, someone said it, unattainable. Every point on the curve would be production efficient. Okay? Yeah. Yeah, so you'll notice I don't ever ask you in these problems about what point is allocatively efficient. Okay? So when we're talking about allocative efficient points, if I just had a more general production possibilities curve, maybe I'll give you a little bit of, since you guys are here today, this might be a good one to pay attention to. So let's say I've got my production possibilities curve for an entire economy, not just 2 people, a bunch, right? How do I find the allocative efficient point? So we said every point on the curve is production efficient, but there's only going to be one point that is allocatively efficient. When we use this term of allocative efficiency, it's the same idea as like the optimal number or equilibrium. So what should be true at the optimal number, equilibrium, allocative efficient point? The marginal benefit is equal to marginal costs. So when I'm thinking about the allocatively efficient amount of good X, what tells me the cost of good X? My slope, right? The slope of my production possibilities curve tells me the cost of good X. So what's happening? My slope is becoming, the quicker you respond, the more problems we get through. My slope is becoming steeper, which means my marginal costs are going up. What else do I need to know if I'm looking for the allocated efficient point? I need my marginal cost, but I also need my marginal benefits, right? So we said we will choose to produce something, we'll choose to buy something, we will choose to, et cetera, as long as the number of hours of study, as long as that marginal benefit is greater than or equal to my marginal cost. So my allocative efficient quantity would be, in this example, this point on my production possibilities curve. Now, do I ever ask you to identify that point? No, because what would I need to give you? You'd have to calculate the marginal cost at every single quantity, and then I would have to give you information about the marginal benefits. Once again, do you see a problem like that pop up anywhere? No. Now, what I could ask you about in terms of this allocative efficient point is how might it change, right? So I'm not going to ask you to find the specific point, but notice here, let's say, and this is, sometimes there's questions on the exam that are easier than I might have some where I take concepts we've talked about, maybe focus a little bit less on, kind of, portion out the A's from the B's or whatever, okay? So let's say I have a technology change. And I could probably intuitively think through this, but I'm going to use a graph. So I've also gotten questions like, do I have to draw graphs in this exam? technically you can just fill in A for every answer if you want, right? That's all. I'm going to look at what you responded to on that Scantron. Drawing a graph or using an equation, like maybe directional arrows, that will lead you to the correct answer is probably this. Every problem you could probably draw something, whether or not it's a graph, whether it's not using an equation, thinking about like directional change with arrows, there's probably something you could draw or write down to help you. So yes, graphs will likely help you get a better grade. You don't need to draw them, but it'll probably help lead you to the correct answer. So here, if I've got the graphs, I'll talk through the intuition and then kind of show you what this would look like. So let's say I have a technology change and it only impacts good X here. Is it going to make it more or less costly? Why do we like new technologies as companies? Because it's likely going to do what to our costs? Lower them, right? I mean, the only example where we see like a de-evolution in like technologies like the Egyptians or something like that, right? So new technologies generally will lower our costs. If my costs are lower, am I going to want to produce more or less of that good than I was before? More. So what should happen to my allocated efficient quantity of good X if I have a technology that improves my production of good X? I'm going to want to produce more of it, which would be at a higher point in that production possibilities curve. Now let's think through, we've talked about this in other contexts and could answer like multiple questions with this idea. What's going to happen to my production possibilities curve if I have a technology change that only impacts X? Is it going to be an outward shift? Not quite, because if I'm only producing Y, how much can I produce? The same amount as I was before. But if I'm producing X, I now have this new technology, I can produce a lot more, right? So we said we kind of have it kick out that production possibility. What's happening to my slope, if I'm looking at any one quantity, my slope is becoming what? Flatter, less steep. If it's flatter, that means the slope is getting closer to 0, which means my costs are going down at every single point. So at every single quantity, my marginal costs are now going to be lower. So if my marginal costs are now lower after this technology change, what's going to happen to the allocative efficient point? For X, I'm going to produce more of it, right? So technology changes in the good are going to lower my cost of producing that good, which is going to increase that allocated efficient point, okay? Excuse me. Any questions on that idea? Yep. Yep. So who's going to produce the very first units of this good? Whoever can produce it at cheapest or a lower cost. So I know whoever has the lower cost, that's who's going to start producing that good. So what was the lowest cost? 2. So the slope will initially be whoever had that lower cost. And then once they've used all their resources, I now have to rely on the next person, which is why my slope then changes to be a little bit higher. With a more continuous production possibilities curve, this isn't just 2 people. It's who's going to first start producing good? The company that can do it the cheapest, then the next cheapest, and then, the cheapest, and the next most, well, now I'm flipping it. Whoever can do it the least expensive, then a little bit more expensive, a little more expensive, right? If I have like more than 2 people, it's just going to be like more of a continuous, like we rely on who can produce it at the lowest cost, next lowest, next lowest, next lowest, next lowest, etc. Is that what you're asking? Okay. Any other questions on this one before we keep moving? Yeah, so who is going to first start producing the x-axis good? Whoever can produce it the cheapest. So it's only talking about that x-axis good, right? In fact, I guess you can phrase it a different way. Who's going to stop producing good y first? Whoever can produce it at a higher cost, right? that to me is a little more confusing to phrase it that way, but it's the same idea, just said a little bit different. So if Frank is producing the x-axis good, he's now using all of his resources. He's only producing 70 green eggs. The only person left producing t-shirts is who? The other person, how many t-shirts can they produce? Yep. I mean, if you don't draw this accurately. I mean, you're finding the values, right? So like I know the point on the curve is 4180. So I know that 4140 has to be below it. So you don't need graphing paper, right? You just need to find this point. Once you know that point, you know that 4180, 4140 would have to be below it. Any other questions on this one? Okay. All right. Any other problems we want to see worked through? Go here and then come down here because I think you were next. All right. You. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Number 8 on exam 2. Okay. Let me look at this one. So that's good. All right. So we've got an increase in the price of gasoline. So this is a distinction that we're making between changes in demand, quantity demand, change in supply or quantity supplied. The entire demand curve. So if I'm looking at a demand curve, it is a bunch of different combinations of price and quantity demanded. So if I see a change in the price of the good I'm looking at, is that a shift in demand? No. What does it do? It moves me to a different point on the demand curve or a different quantity demanded. Okay? So the only thing that changes quantity demand or quantity supplied is a change in the price of the good that you're looking at the market for. Right? So in that problem, my screen's not showing up here. There we go. Okay. If we're looking at a change in the price of gasoline, that's going to change either the quantity supplied or the quantity demanded. If the price goes up, am I going to supply more or less? If I'm selling something and the price is higher, do I want to sell more or less of it? So the quantity supplied would go up. So an increase in price should increase my quantity supplied. Okay? If I see an increase in the price, do I want to buy more or less? So it wouldn't be an increase in my quantity demanded there. It should be a decrease. So B can't be right. C should be right. And then why is A and D not right? So if I see an increase in the price, well, why don't I see a decrease in demand? A decrease in demand would mean not that I'm moving to a different point on my demand curve. It would mean that I'm seeing an entire shift in that demand curve. Okay? So the only thing that changes quantity, supply, or demand is a change in the price of that good. When anything else changes, like that's what the demand curve is telling us. The relationship between the price and the quantity demanded for that product. When other things change, it'll shift that line, right? It'll shift that demand curve. So how many of you have taken like a stats course? Has anybody talked about like linear regression? That's the idea, right? You want to understand the relationship between two variables. When you add more in, that relationship between these two variables doesn't change, but it might like shift. Your intercept is going to kind of shift where that line is. So changes in income, changes in the price of other goods, changes in the number of consumers, all of those things, no matter what the price of the current good is, will move the quantity demanded. So if it's going to move the quantity demanded at every single price, changes in all of these other things will shift or change the entire demand or the entire demand curve. Okay? So decreases in demand would be like a leftward shift. We said you can think about it as like, what do I want here? I want like if I see an increase in either supply or demand, that's going to look like I'm getting closer to zero. Or sorry, if I'm doing, I have this, hold on. I drew a decrease, right? So we'll start there. If I have a decrease in supply or demand, I'm getting closer to zero. This is going to be a leftward shift. If I saw an increase in supply or demand, that means I'm getting further from zero. So if I see an increase in either one, that's going to look like a rightward shift. But these shifts are caused by changes in things other than the price of the good itself. So we're looking at this problem. Demand actually won't change at all. The demand curve hasn't changed at all when we change the price of gas. When we change the price of gas, we're just moving to different points on that gas demand curve. Okay. Questions on that one before we keep moving? So a change in the quantity demand, whoops, sorry. Talking and hitting the wrong things. Changes in the quantity demanded are just movements to different points on the demand curve. Yep. Any other questions on that one before we keep moving? Okay. And and then I'll get you next. Okay. So what's your question? I'll come to you next. Which one? So I can work through it. I would suggest we do other ones because question 5 is like the exact same thing that we've already worked through from practice exam 1. So I think it's probably going to be beneficial for you to see me work through more concepts as opposed to working through the exact same like type of question. But you would solve 5 basically the same way we solved 3 for practice exam 1, right? So just for the sake of trying to hit as many concepts as possible, I'll probably kind of hold off on that. If we have time at the end, we might come back to that one. We'll go here and then here. So 8. So we have one change here, right? I'll do this one and I'll kind of actually update the problem a little bit as well so we can get multiple concepts. So I've got substitutes. Is that the one you're looking at? Substitutes and consumption. So I had beer and hard seltzers here. I was kind of thinking about, sometimes I see things pop up and I think about like how this applies to like this class or how I could use it. But like when I was in college, I didn't even know if I knew what a hard seltzer was. So like they've like had this huge explosion. So if we're thinking about the market for these hard seltzers here, right? And let's say there's substitutes for beer, right? They're kind of a substitute. So if all of a sudden, so I have this market, I've got a downward sloping demand curve, I've got an upward sloping supply curve. Here's where my initial equilibrium starts out, okay? If I see a change in the price of beer here, and it's a substitute in consumption, right? So anytime I have substitutes, if I see an increase, yeah. So this is where, think of 2 goods that are substitutes to you. So I always think of like any 2 things where there's brands is probably a good example. So Coke and Pepsi is a like dumb example I always use, because if you go into the store and Coke all of a sudden is like twice, the price is a lot higher, are you going to be more or less likely to buy Pepsi? More likely, right? But the price of Pepsi didn't change. There's no change in the quantity demanded for Pepsi, but because the price of these substitutes goods went up, what did your demand do for its substitutes? It actually also went up because you want to buy what is relatively cheaper, right? So Coke is more expensive. My demand for Pepsi is going to be higher. It became relatively cheaper. Same idea here. The price of beer goes up. What happens to the demand for hard seltzers? If they are substitutes in consumption, we should see a demand increase, right? So we're then going to have kind of this increase in demand. When I said increases, we're moving away from zero, so it's like shifts to the right. What's that going to do to our equilibrium quantity and price? Sorry, my lines are a little bit off here, but you get it, right? It has pushed my price up. and my quantity up. So this demand increase caused quantity and price, my equilibrium quantity price, to go up. Okay. Everybody with me on this one? Any questions on this? So let's instead assume I had this exact same thing. And this is where it gets a little bit weird. And I probably would give you different changes, but just for the sake of this example, let's say I was looking at that same market. So it started out, it was an equilibrium, but let's do a simultaneous shift one. So the original problem was just a change, something that changed demand, one shift, what happened to the equilibrium price and quantity. If I have simultaneous shifts, what's always going to be true? The change in something is going to be, like someone said it, indeterminate, or you cannot determine, right? So we'll kind of show this with one example, but anytime you have simultaneous shifts or changes, the answer to one, either the equilibrium price or quantity change, will be indeterminate. We don't know. So this is kind of a weird one, and I likely wouldn't use this as an example on the exam. I would give you maybe like a decrease or an increase in the number of producers, right? Or a tax on producers. So you would shift supply, but it would be something else that's changing. But let's think about this. So maybe hard seltzers and beer, not only are they substitutes in consumption, if I'm producing, I have a canning production facility and I can produce some type of liquid products, I can probably make beer or I can make hard seltzers. So let's say they're substitutes also in production. Well, this gets a little bit weird because now if the price of price of beer went up, if they're substitutes in production, when the price of a Y good goes up, what happens to my supply of the other products? If I'm selling these products and Y is more, I can sell it for more money, do I want to produce more of Y or X? More Y. I'm a producer. I'm selling something. Do I want to sell it for more money or less money? More. So if all of a sudden I can sell beer for more money, I'm going to take my production process, I'm going to produce more beer, which means inherently I'm going to be producing less of the other product or less hard seltzers here. Right? So for supply, it's decreased. What's that going to look like? We said decreases, I'm moving towards that 0 point. So my supply is going to shift to the left. At my new supply curve, the new equilibrium is right here. Quantities went down, prices went up. So what's the total effect if these happen at the same time? Well, I've got that my demand change over here. Now I can see, okay, my supply decrease caused the quantity to go down, but price to go up. The way I would solve the simultaneous shifts, I draw them out separately. If you draw them on the same graph, you might lead yourself to the incorrect answer, right? Because it depends on how large you draw these shifts. If you kind of use this like little arrow summary, or you could say it goes up or down or positive, negative, whatever makes the most sense to you. But here, if supply at the same time goes down, and as a result, quantity went down, but price went up, right? I'm just stacking these two things that happen at the same time. What's my total effect? What's definitely going to happen to price here? They're both pushing the price up, so I know the price is going to go up. What's going to happen to quantity? I don't know. It's indeterminate. In fact, I don't ask you questions like this. I wouldn't push you this far. But what would I need to know in order to actually tell you if quantity went up or down? Which of these changes was larger, right? If they're pushing quantity in the opposite direction, which one is going to win out or dominate? The one that's larger. I never pushed you that far. As far as I asked you to do is identify they're pushing in opposite directions, and that we can't say. It's indeterminate change. I cannot determine what the change is. If I kind of extended this to make it harder, I would then say, okay, what if the response from producers was larger than the response from, well, okay, now I know which one is larger, I could make, but I'm not going to ask, you didn't see that pop up on any of the practice stuff, So that's not something I'm going to ask. Okay. Any questions on this idea? And there's a couple problems on the practice exams, and each one talking about at least one problem on each. It's a simultaneous change. So you will have a simultaneous change question. So this is probably a question that maybe separates, A's from the B's, et cetera. All right, where are we at on time? Okay, so about 15 minutes. So any other questions? We'll go here and we'll try to answer as many times. Oh, yeah. Yeah, you've got to graph out each change individually, right? Because if you try to put them on the same graph, depending on how large you draw the shifts, it could lead you to thinking that quantity goes up or down. Yep. Any other questions on this one? No? So we'll go here, and then I saw someone up there. $15 practice problems. What's it about? Get me started before I can get there. Oh, okay. So okay. So what, 8? What problem? Oh, 15. Okay. So this is, we've got a normal good, and we're thinking about changes in the expected future income, right? So this is just going to be a single shift. So if I think, so the problem tells me I've got new cars and my markers are bleeding through. So so it's a normal good, and I expect that my future income is going to go up, okay? I will, if I use an income one, future income and income changes work the exact same way. So if I think I'm going to have more money in the future, what do a lot of people do? Take out. What do a lot of you probably have? Student. Why? Because you think you're going to make more money after 4 years, right? So it doesn't matter if you have higher income now or you expect it, it'll work in the exact same direction. Yep. So for a normal good, if I expect to have more income in the future, what happens to my current demand? Goes up. If I had an inferior good, if I expect more income in the future, what's going to happen to my current demand? Actually, it's going to go down, right? Which is why, I drive around campus and see some of you driving cars way nicer than mine, right? But this is the general idea, right? Now, what works in the opposite way, I would just kind of mention this because it can be a little tricky. If I'm thinking about expected prices, right? So if I am talking about price expectations, they're going to vary for consumers and producers, right? So if I'm thinking about for consumers, if I expect prices to be higher, and if you want, you could think about like expected prices in the future. If I think prices are going to be higher tomorrow, what's going to happen to current demand? So if I'm buying something and I think the price is going to be higher tomorrow, what do I make sure I do today? So higher expected prices actually leads to higher current demand, right? What if I expect the prices to be lower in the future? Then my current demand, I'm going to try to hold out and not buy it today, but buy it tomorrow. So my current demand would actually go down. But now if I think about expectations, this is where I'll try to bold a lot of this on the exam so that you're making sure you're paying attention to keywords. But read the questions carefully. If I had told you instead that producers expected higher future prices, what's going to happen to my current supply? So if I'm selling something and I think the price is going to be higher tomorrow, do I want to sell it today or tomorrow? So what's going to happen to my current supply? It's going to go down. So notice that expectation of future prices, exact opposite impacts on demand and supply. If I'm a supplier and I think that the price is going to be lower tomorrow, what do I want to make sure I do today? sell it or increase my supply today. Okay. So expectations for prices impact consumers and producers the exact opposite way. And then you would draw these shifts and understand kind of how they would change the equilibrium. Okay. Any other questions? I thought I had one back here when I asked earlier. I said, I think it was you, and then I'll come back to you. Yeah. All right. Practice exam 1, 15. Is this the one with equations? Once again, this is being, I don't know why, word. All right. So, oh, is it talking about surpluses and shortages? All right, let me get there real quick. So this is a one worthwhile. Talking about, so let's say I give you this graph, right? And I'm telling you, and this is where this one, I try to use old questions and recycle, and sometimes I go through concepts a little bit different, out of order. Here, we didn't talk about price ceilings. The way I would have phrased this question on the exam, though, think about the price ceiling. The government is just setting the price at 20 here. We can just think about they're setting the price at this value. So if the government sets the price at 20, what is my quantity supplied? 40. What is my quantity demanded? 120. So if I'm thinking about anytime my quantity supplied is less than my quantity demanded, I think this is the values. If not, this might have been 120. If more people want to buy this good than what the producers want to supply, what do I have? Yeah, this would be our kind of definition of a shortage, right? When is a shortage going to occur? Anytime the price is below what? So at this equilibrium point, what is true about the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded? They're the same value. What prices is the quantity demanded greater than the quantity supplied? Every price below that, the quantity demanded is above my quantity supplied. So any price below the equilibrium, I know I'm going to have a shortage. When would I have what we call a surplus? So anytime I have a surplus, that's going to mean my quantity demanded is less than the quantity supplied, right? So if I'm thinking about the equilibrium, as the price goes up, what's happening to the quantity supplied? It's going, prices go up, do producers supply more or less? More. What's happening to my quantity demanded? The price goes up, it's going down, right? People buy less when the price is higher. So from that equilibrium point, if I increase the price above the equilibrium, we know quantity supply will be greater than quantity demanded, or I'm going to have a surplus. So kind of visually, I could have actually told you this in words instead of giving you this graph. I could have said, let's assume the current equilibrium price is 40. If I set the price at 70, will a surplus or shortage exist? Well, if I know at 40 is the equilibrium, if I set a price above that, I know that the quantity demanded will be lower than this point. The quantity supplied will be higher. If the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded, I have a surplus. I have more units being supplied than what people want to buy. Okay. So we got what? Another 5 minutes? Any other problems? Yeah, we'll go here. So on exam 2, okay, yeah. So this, I try to put a few questions. You'll notice on practice exam 1, there weren't really any questions coming from module 1, right? So if you're wanting additional questions you might see from module 1, this practice exam, also going back to the second half of the quiz questions, so not the ones related to the syllabus, but kind of the first quiz, the second, it's like half of those questions that were related to content. I'd make sure I review those because you will see some questions from module 1, kind of like you have here in this practice exam. So let's assume that I was thinking about the number of hours that someone was studying, and whatever that marginal cost, we know that as I take more and more of my hours, first I'm giving up the hours that weren't very costly to me. I wasn't really doing anything with that time anyways. But as I study more and more, I have to, maybe I don't go to the gym. Maybe I start spending time with my friends instead. So my hours I'm giving up become more costly. Also, the very first hour I put into studying is a huge benefit to me. By the time I study 50 hours, what's the benefit of that, the marginal benefit of the 51st? Pretty small. So I know I have declining marginal benefits. This is where even in module 1, we were setting ourselves up for thinking about allocated efficient points, right? Marginal benefits were decreasing, marginal costs were increasing. We were talking about the production possibilities curve. We're also setting ourselves up for market equilibriums. Demand was downward sloping. It represented marginal benefits. Supply was upward sloping or increasing, representing marginal costs or increasing. So if I was previously studying for 3 hours, and now all of a sudden the optimal or the allocated efficient or the equilibrium number of hours I'm studying is now 2, what could have caused that? So the options I was given had 2 responses that were marginal changes, so a change to marginal cost or marginal benefits, or changes in the total benefits or total costs. How do we make decisions? Based off of changes at the margin. This is where we set up everything from module 1. People make decisions. We choose to do something if the marginal benefit is what? Greater than or equal to the marginal cost. We're making decisions based off the margins. So we can draw this out visually, or you can just think intuitively. If I'm choosing all of a sudden to study fewer hours than I was before, if I'm thinking about changes to the additional costs, why would I study less if the costs went up? So if my marginal costs increase, this is where it gets kind of weird, because when I'm talking about costs, I'm saying that at every number of hours, my marginal costs are now higher. So it kind of looks like a decrease in supply, but that's because when we say decreases in supply, that's talking about quantities. When I'm talking about the costs, I'm talking about my y-axis. So if I see an increase in my costs, that's actually going to push my optimal number. I didn't draw this quite right, but it's going to force it to be lower. So the answer there should be that might I choose to study fewer hours? Well, if the marginal costs increase, right? Now, I could also have what? So what also could have caused that optimal number to go down? So let's say I think about that same kind of setup. I've got my marginal costs, my marginal benefits. I was studying 3. What would force that allocated efficient or optimal number to be lower? What direction would my marginal benefits have to change by? It would have to be that they are going this way, right? So if my marginal benefits decrease, then the new optimal number could be at this lower value of 2. Now, I think the options you were given was an increase in marginal benefits. Well, that wouldn't work. That would actually push my hour. Like if the benefit of studying goes up, am I going to study more or less? More. If the marginal benefit of studying went down, am I going to study more or less? Less, right? So you can think through this sometimes with intuition, but there's also graphs we can kind of draw out to kind of lead us to the correct answer there. But the real concept there was, when you looked initially, you should have been able to rule out those total benefits and total cost options right away, because we only make decisions based off of marginal changes. Okay? All right. So that should do it for us today. Once again, office hours tomorrow. You have those tutoring sessions if you want to take advantage of those tonight or tomorrow night. Other than that, good luck studying, and I will see you all here on Thursday. Yep.